Hello Blue Ops, one piece of malware, no phishing email, no user clicking anything, took the UK's National Health Service offline in a single afternoon. This is WannaCry, and it is the single most important case study you will ever look at as an IT professional moving into blue team work. Most breaches make headlines because someone got tricked. A phishing email, a weak password, a misconfigured S3 bucket. WannaCry didn't need any of that. It spread across the public internet on its own. It infected machines while their users were making coffee, and it did it by weaponizing a protocol that was still enabled by default on production systems all over the world. For an IT professional, that's the punchline you need to sit with, because the systems it hit weren't exotic. They were the same servers, workstations, and file shares you already administer. The defense wasn't exotic either, and we'll walk through exactly what would have stopped it. Let's start with the timeline, because the gap between patch available and patch deployed is where almost every real breach happens, and WannaCry made that gap visible in a way nothing before it had. March 14th, 2017, Microsoft ships Security Bulletin MS-17-010. It's a critical patch for a remote code execution flaw in an old file sharing protocol called Server Message Block version 1 SMB version 1. Exactly 1 month later, April 14th, a group calling itself the Shadow Brokers dumps a stolen cache of NSA cyber weapons on the open web. The dump is titled Lost in Translation. Inside it, an exploit called EternalBlue, which targets the exact vulnerability Microsoft had just patched. May 12th, 59 days after the patch, 28 days after the leak, WannaCry is released into the wild. It pairs EternalBlue with a ransomware payload and a worm engine and starts scanning the internet for port 445. By that afternoon, the NHS is declaring a major incident. Clinicians locked out of patient records, MRI scanners refusing to boot, ambulance diverted, 19,000 appointments cancelled. That evening, a researcher operating as malware tech reverse engineers the malware and spots something odd, a hard-coded, unregistered domain baked into the code. He registers it for about $10. Turns out to be a kill switch. Propagation slows within hours. May 13th, Microsoft does something they almost never do. They ship emergency patches for operating systems they no longer support. Windows XP, Server 2003. That is how bad it was. In the immediate chaos, WannaCry looked like an opportunistic outbreak. It wasn't. Public attribution came from the US and UK governments in December of 2017. The US Department of Justice's 2018 indictment of Park Jin-hyuk laid out the technical case in detail. WannaCry was the work of Lazarus Group, an advanced persistent threat operating on behalf of North Korea. Lazarus is worth understanding because it breaks the mental model most IT professionals bring into security. Russian and Chinese state actors are typically framed around espionage and intellectual property theft. North Korean APTs have a different mandate. They exist in part to generate revenue to work around sanctions. That's why the same operators show up hitting banks, cryptocurrency exchanges, and hospitals in the same year. Here's the part worth remembering. Lazarus didn't discover the SMB version 1 vulnerability. The NSA did. What Lazarus demonstrated was operational speed. Within weeks of the leak, they had integrated a nation-state exploit into a self-propagating ransomware worm and shipped it globally. The tools nation-states built in 2010 leak into the hands of everyone else by 2017. Modern ransomware crews inherited both the exploit and the worm design pattern. WannaCry is the template. Now let's get technical, because if you have spent any time as a sysadmin or a network engineer, you already know most of what's about to happen. You just haven't looked at it through an attacker's eyes. Server Message Block, SMB. It's the protocol Windows uses for file sharing, printer sharing, and inter-process communication over TCP port 445. Most modern networks run SMB version 2 or SMB version 3. SMB version 1 is a different animal, retained for backward compatibility with legacy NAS appliances, older printers, and operational technology that had never been recertified. On May 12, 2017, it was still enabled by default on a huge number of production systems. WannaCry didn't just encrypt files, it was a cryptoworm. It paired a ransomware payload with the EternalBlue exploit, CVE 2017-0144, and a scanner that hunted for the next victim on its own. The exploit itself targets a flaw in the Windows kernel SMB driver srv.sys in how it parses something called file extended attributes. There's a size calculation error deep in the code. A value that should be handled as one width gets handled as another. Small mismatch, catastrophic consequences. That mismatch lets an attacker convince the kernel to allocate a small memory buffer and then write far more data into it than the buffer can hold. That is a heap overflow in the kernel's non-paged pool. By carefully sending fragmented SMB packets, a technique called heap grooming, the exploit ensures the overflow lands where it needs to land, overwriting adjacent kernel structures cleanly. The end state, arbitrary code, executing in kernel mode as anti-authority \system. No user interaction, no elevation step, no phishing. Once EternalBlue landed, the attacker installed a stealthy kernel mode backdoor called Double Pulsar. Double Pulsar didn't write files to disk. It lived in memory and hooked into SMB transactions, letting the operator push additional payloads through the same channel. Through Double Pulsar, WannaCry did three things in sequence. 1. Scan. It spawned threads to enumerate the local subnet and generate random public IP addresses, hammering port 445 to find the next unpatched host. 2. Encrypt. It encrypted local files with a combination of AES 128 and RSA 2048. 3. Destroy recovery. Before ransoming, it ran native Windows commands to torch local backups. That last step is the one most IT teams underestimate. Volume shadow copies are the thing people quietly rely on when something goes wrong. WannaCry made a point of taking them out first. Global losses were estimated at up to $4 billion. That number is a directional estimate, not an audited figure, but the human cost is not disputed. The NHS faced a genuine patient safety event. 19,000 appointments cancelled, ambulance diverted from affected emergency departments, diagnostic equipment, MRI, CT, locked out, staff dropped to pen, paper, and fax. Outside healthcare, Renault and Nissan physically halted vehicle assembly lines because the manufacturing execution systems couldn't run. This is the point where keeping servers up and cybersecurity stop being separable disciplines. Availability is a security property. The reason security exists inside an organization is not to write policy documents. It's to keep the systems the business depends on doing what the business needs them to do in the face of people actively trying to stop that from happening. Now the part that matters most for you, because the temptation with a WannaCry retrospective is to say patch faster and stop there. Patching was necessary. It wasn't sufficient. The reason WannaCry hurt so badly is that the environments it hit had no defense in depth. At Blue Team Academy, we work every real environment through 4 steps: inventory, threats, controls, scale. Step 1. Inventory. You cannot defend what you cannot see. Before disabling anything, a real answer to 3 questions. Which hosts still have SMB version 1 enabled? Servers, workstations, appliances? Which hosts legitimately require SMB access to which other hosts? And which endpoints are running an operating system Microsoft no longer supports? None of that is glamorous. All of it is the work. Step 2. Threats. Once you know what you have, model how an attacker moves through it. For a cryptoworm, the model is not complicated. Entry point, an Internet Expose 445, an infected laptop rejoining the corporate LAN, a vendor's engineer connecting from a compromised network. Lateral movement, workstation to workstation over SMB, service accounts with unnecessary domain reach, shared local admin credentials. Impact, encryption of file shares, destruction of shadow copies, loss of backup catalogs. You don't need to name a specific threat actor to do this. You need to name the behavior. Step 3. Controls, working from the threat model, not from a generic checklist. Kill SMB version 1. Patching was table stakes. Removing the protocol entirely is the real fix. Enforce it via group policy, so it stays off when someone reinstalls an application that helpfully turns it back on. Segment the network. Workstations almost never need to talk to other workstations over 445. Enforce that at the host firewall via GPO. Use VLANs and edge access control lists so any user subnets can reach designated file servers and nothing else. Flat networks are how one infection becomes 1,000. Detect the pattern, not just the file. Deploy Suricata or Snort on internal choke points tuned for the malformed SMB traffic EternalBlue relies on. Feed SMB session logs into your SIEM. A single host attempting 4 or 5 connections against dozens of others in a minute is not noise. Make backups actually recover you. Shadow copies are not a backup strategy against modern ransomware, because modern ransomware deletes them first. Backups need to be of the same identity plane as the systems they protect. Separate credentials, separate network path, with immutability, so a compromised admin account cannot destroy them. Step 4. Scale. And this is the step that separates a WannaCry postmortem from a real defensive practice. Apply the same reasoning to every other legacy protocol you inherited. The pattern, a legacy protocol enabled by default for compatibility, running on a flat network, unmonitored, with no immutable recovery path. SMB version 1 is one instance. Telnet is another. FTP is another. LM and NTLM version 1 authentication are another. Unrestricted WinRM, unscoped WMI, unsigned SMB version 2, they all rhyme with it. An IT professional who can walk into an environment and run that loop, inventory, model, control, apply the loop to the next protocol, is thinking like a defender. That's the transition. And it's a shorter distance from your daily work than most people realize. Every worm-based intrusion in the 8 years since WannaCry has borrowed from its playbook. NotPetya used EternalBlue 2 months later, with worse consequences and no kill switch. Bad Rabbit reused parts of the design. Modern ransomware crews routinely include SMB-based lateral movement modules, even when their initial access came from somewhere else entirely. WannaCry is not a museum piece. It is the clearest existing worked example of how the environments you already run get turned into weapons, and of how ordinary IT hygiene applied with a defender's intent would have stopped almost all of it. Cybersecurity is not rocket science. It is the same infrastructure work you already do, aimed at a different question. What would an attacker do with this? And how would we know? If you want to build that thinking into how you approach your own environment, we walk the threat and control method through real incidents like this one, link in the description. And for a set of cybersecurity information in your inbox every week, along with the current state of the Blue Team job market, sign up for the Keep IT Safe newsletter, also linked below. If you want to know more about cybersecurity, subscribe here to stay tuned. We'll see you in the next one, Blue Ops.